Okay. Okay, good, good, good. I was gonna do the test thing, but that's kind of annoying. Like testing, 1, 2. I just did it, so there we go. Hello, everybody. I just want to welcome you all. If this is your first time here in the Jax Maker space, then welcome, welcome, welcome. You are here today for our program that is entitled Lasting LaVilla. We have the pleasure of showcasing 13 different photographers here in our Jax Makerspace Gallery from our first floor all the way up into our fourth floor for you to be able to see the current exhibition that's on view, which is called Jacksonville, A Tale of My City. This particular exhibit was very special to us in putting it on here in the Makerspace Gallery because we really wanted to showcase how community is affected through the people and the places and the things that are around them. And this is how neighborhoods are basically made. But some of the challenges that we have is how are these neighborhoods able to effectively tell their stories, and how are they getting out what they're either changing or even revitalizing from what happened before. When I first invited Bob Self to be a part of this exhibit, I was very scared. One, he was going to turn me down. If you're not familiar with Bob, he is a photographer for the Florida Times Union and has been in that profession for over 34 years.
34 years old.
34 years August.
You don't look that old.
Right?
I feel it.
I knew he is, one, such an amazing talent that doesn't always get looked at as a specifically artist in this community, but he is gloriously so. And when I invited him, I had one particular thought process of the subject matter that he would bring in, and then he showed me something else. And oh boy, when I saw it, I was floored and literally in tears. So I knew that it was going to spark some conversation. It was going to reignite some of the things that we've been talking about currently as Jacksonville gets ready to enter into its 50th year of being a consolidated city. What does that mean for certain parts of the neighborhoods that basically saw themselves get a little bit lost along the way? So without further ado, I would really love to introduce to you and have him come up here and speak, Mr. Bob Self, and he'll talk more about his photographs from this current exhibit and his photo documentary process. Bob Self.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all coming out, considering the weather looks pretty nasty out there. But Bob came to Jacksonville 34 years ago for the job. I was an Air Force brat. Growing up, covered a lot of ground. High school down in Melbourne, University of Florida, graduated from there. Went to the Daytona Beach Community College after that, and went through some technical photography training there, and then went looking for a job. They offered me one here. Been here ever since. So I'm a relative newcomer to Jacksonville compared to a lot of the old timers, and so I probably came into the area with some fresh eyes. And that kind of dictates the way I see a lot of things when I work. I've done a couple of projects over the years. I mean, as a newspaper photographer, everything is kind of deadline matter. You get out, you shoot it, you got to get back in, get it out for tomorrow's paper. Boom. And it's great, and it serves a purpose that way. But I've also always been very interested in long-term documentary projects where you revisit a subject, a place, a culture, or something, and you go back again and again and again until you start knowing the people and the place, and they get to know you, and you build up a level of trust where other doors start to open for you. And you get invited in to see things and get access to things that, as a passerby or in the daily photo assignments, you're never going to get past that facade. And not long after coming to Jacksonville, a few years into it, I was very curious about American Beach. I kept hearing about this segregated beach up on Amelia Island. Everybody just kind of treated that as a normal thing, and to me that just seemed very strange. And I would make inquiries about it, and people would say, "It's the Black Beach, no big deal." I said, "Yeah, that is a big deal. At least for me as an outsider, it was a big deal." So finally, I started going up there on my days off. with a camera and just walking around. And the first day I went up there, it was just destined to be. There are things in life that you can't necessarily plan on, but when you hit it, you realize, I got to do this. And American Beach was one of those. The first day was just magic light. The crowds were amazing. The activity going on. It was like stepping into another world. And so I ended up spending 3 years documenting the dynamic of the community at the beach. It was a few years after that project. I believe Bob Mack was the photographer. I think we were driving back from Tallahassee covering a football game. And he goes, they're going to start clearing out the LaVilla neighborhood. The Jaguars coming to town, and they want to make a better first impression of the city when you get off the interstate than pulling off and going through the LaVilla neighborhood. And says, you probably ought to go do something like you did at American Beach there. And it wasn't even on my radar. I'm like, yeah, that's a really good idea. So I did, and started in early summer of '95. On slow days, I just go down into the neighborhood and just start walking around. It's only a few blocks from the paper, so it's real easy. And I continued doing that for about 17 months. Didn't tell many of the editors of the paper what I was doing. Fortunately, then we had a staff of like 16 photographers. So, they didn't know, it was no big deal if you had a slow day, you could go out and do stuff. Now we're down to 2 photographers. So that's a little harder to do these days. But, and I just would start walking the streets and getting a feel for the neighborhood, what was still there at that point. Some of the demolition and tearing up the streets for new infrastructure and drainage and all that kind of stuff. It was starting, but there was still a bit of a neighborhood left. And there were some businesses left. And so I would stick my head in the doors and I would say hi. And I'd go to Brown's Cafe and have lunch when it was 100 plus degrees inside and the fan was going so loud you couldn't hear yourself talk. But the food was wonderful. And I would get to know people in the neighborhood. And through knowing people in the neighborhood, they would introduce me to other people. And that's kind of the way I operate. And that's where this body of work came from. So, let's get this going here. You wouldn't know it by driving through there now, but LaVilla was very much a neighborhood. It was kind of a segregated neighborhood, although it started out in the earliest days. It was a very diverse neighborhood, large Jewish community, an immigrant community. There's African American community as well. It served the train station, what's now the convention center. So it was a place where the Pullman porters lived. There were businesses that served the clientele from the trains coming through town. There were businesses that provided maintenance services and all that kind of stuff, and catering services. So there were a lot of things in LaVilla over the years. It had a pretty well-known red light district. There were a lot of things that happened there, and it was kind of its own little self-contained community that the greater Jacksonville area just kind of left on its own. But like what happened with so many, but by the time I was in there in the mid-'80s, it was predominantly African American, and the legal segregation in the '60s. At that point, a lot of the upper echelon of the community started moving out. When you had the option, you'd go up and you'd build your nice new house up on the Trout River, or you'd go to other areas of town, which before you didn't have that option. But what happened was what was left behind were a lot of absentee property owners. So, and the people that were still in the community were renters. So the money base wasn't there. It couldn't support the businesses like it used to. It couldn't support the restaurants and the hotels and things like that. And a lot of the things that made up the dynamic community during segregation was fading away. And when you've got absentee property owners and renters, they're not inclined to keep on the city to maintain infrastructure. So that had about a 20-year decline. So by the mid 80s, the place was in bad shape. And that's when the city decided that they wanted it gone. So that was coming off the interstate onto State Street. That was the first impression. But this is pretty much what the neighborhood looked like. A lot of small houses, some good sized houses, a lot of boarded up houses, but all of it right on the edge of downtown Jacksonville. I spoke to her a little bit. She had rented a room in this little place for like 15 years. There were long-term residents. It was a neighborhood. And I didn't go in to tell a particular story because I didn't know what that story was. I did go in to document the neighborhood at that point in its history and kind of let the story dictate itself to me. It's Brown's Cafe. There's beauty all over the place, even in the most rundown neighborhoods.
That's a beautiful photo up there. This one, yeah.
And she was a long-term resident of LaVilla. That was her home. Trying to remember the Extra Brill. Yeah. It was on West. Excuse me. Yeah, it's her West Beaver Street home. She lived there since 1943.
Wow.
There's the sign announcing all the big plans for the neighborhood. All low grocery stores in the neighborhood. You had houses that were still occupied with renters and such, and like this was a whole row of these 2 stories. They were all boarded up, so they were already all cleared out. This was Nate Small, 87 years old. This was inside the Hollywood Music Store.
What year is this? Mid-80s or?
This was October of 1995 that I shot that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The Hollywood Music Store, I don't know if you're familiar with the Clear White Mission. Okay. It's that little building to the right of the Clear White Mission, the single story. Actually, jump ahead one. That's the Clear White Mission.
Right.
This was the Hollywood Music Store.
Oh, wow.
Across the street over there is the old Stanton High School, which was the segregated black high school. The Hollywood Music Store, in addition to selling records, it used to rent and sell musical instruments to the band members at Old Stanton High School. I think I walked out of there with a couple of new 45s. And then you started seeing signs of people clearing out. The more I did it, the more you started seeing homes getting boarded up, people moving out of where they were living. Fires became a big thing. A lot of the homeless folks they would hang out in the empty houses once they got cleared out. From time to time, one of them would catch fire for whatever reason. Some may have been arson, others may have just been accidental, but so that became an issue all through the neighborhood. But then as the city bought up the property and people got moved out, crews went around, inspected the places, made sure everybody was out, assessed them for asbestos and things like that they had to be concerned about before the demolition process, and then boarded them up. clearing out the icky stuff before they could tear the place down. Part of what I do when I'm photographing is trying to capture kind of a mood. And a little ways into it, the neighborhood got to be just it was kind of solemn. I mean, there were still pockets of normalcy and day-to-day activity, but more and more kind of the abandonment became more and more apparent. So there were buildings like this that were just sitting open. Next door could be a family living in a house.
Nobody was getting near that thing.
This was a little social club up on Davis Street in the block that the Ritz Theater was on. It was a shoe shine shop, but it was also like a little social club. So people hanging out and chat. Rooming house residents in the summertime. They probably were renting the room by the week. And just something you saw over and over and over again. Just one of the little bars, one of the little clubs coming down. And then in the middle of it, you just got the routine. Crab boil. Beautiful, beautiful little moment. Gorgeous late afternoon sunlight. So these are the things that I try and capture. They're not huge moments. They're like little real life moments that give some humanity to what was kind of an institutional story about the place being bought up and being demolished. So I try to put a human face on whatever I know. It's never about buildings. It's always about the people that are affected by whatever's going on with those buildings. One of the big things in the neighborhood is the buildings were coming down and people were moving out with the scavengers in the neighborhood. And these are people that would go in as soon as the house got vacated and strip out the copper wire. And that's what they're doing here. They're burning the insulation off copper wire they pulled out of the house.
Wow.
They would, any kind of metal for scrap, metal roofing and things, they get that. If there were architectural details left in the houses, old mantelpieces, columns out front, stained glass or panel glass windows, or anything that could be scavenged and sold to somebody, these guys would move in, very efficient. And I got to know most of the scavengers, the part where they all knew who I was. So they didn't care, and nobody was giving them a hard time for the most part. Because they knew that if they didn't get it quick, it was all just going to get bulldozed. One of the guys cleaning off the rest of the wire in a rainstorm. He was one of the main guys that saw a lot of him. Mm-hmm. There's one little pocket of activity where kind of the social area under some big shady lot, always playing the checkers and always had a lot of activity there. And you just kind of insert yourself and they've seen you around and you go in and you strike up a conversation. You're interested in what they're doing. They sense it if you're real or not and if you're genuine or not. And then they also kind of wanted to try and hustle you or in checkers. It was funny how it worked. You'd win the first couple games and they'd get you confident. And then, boy, they'd get you. Looking down Beaver Street, late afternoon light. That was Extra's home. So that's gone, that's gone, that's gone. This is still standing. This is the one that the city or that the Clear White Mission turned into veterans housing. So that at least got repurposed. Somebody that was in the neighborhood visiting family members. Midst of all, you got somebody fixing their place up and putting on a fresh coat of paint. One of the little social clubs in the neighborhood. There's a one-man demolition team. The house had burned, and so the owner of the property hired him to clean it out and clear it off.
Wow.
It was a slow process. But yeah, once the bulldozers started rolling, things started happening faster and faster. So I'm trying to think what's exactly is sitting on this block right now. I think that's pretty close. This whole area through here, because that's that big round thing that encloses a bunch of electrical switching boxes and such. So I think that's pretty much where LaVilla School of the Arts is now. And this was a whole row of like, two-story rooming houses. Abandoned house. People just left everything behind. Folks going to find what they can salvage or what they want.
Yeah,
Things that are just left behind. If anybody has questions about anything, I'd much rather answer questions that you have about the work and about my process than just keep talking off the top of my head. So don't hesitate to say, hey, ask away. Your fire teams were out practicing techniques and such and on the old buildings that were going to get knocked down anyway. Well, now bar, which has gone through a few incarnations over the year, that was one of the places where Ray Charles started his career when he was a student at the DMV school. LaVilla was also where he developed a cocaine habit.
yeah.
And this was a whole row of businesses or business buildings that were all directly across the street from what's now the Claire White Mission. And the fires just became ever present. This building burnt 2 or 3 times before it finally collapsed. Just in the partial ruins of a house, I just walking down and that was just laying there. A little clue of who used to be there. And you see things like that and you kind of want to, you make up your own stories in your head, who was the little girl that owned that, where was the family, what happened, what were their circumstances. I don't know, I have no idea. But it kind of helps put that human face on what could otherwise just be a picture of a rundown building. This was one of those times where I think they were busting up a sidewalk of an area that wasn't going to be demolished. So that was problematic. But they both knew me and the cops knew me and it was just very matter of fact. And I think he eventually turned them loose.
We were just saying how this would not happen today. It wouldn't look like that at all.
Yeah, you had 10 police officers.
Guns.
Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah.
A lot of things are different now.
We were wondering why they were smiling.
It was just like, whatever. It was not a big deal. That's the block with the Ritz Theater. That's the marquee down there, at the end of the block for the Ritz.
Was that a random fire, or was it intentional as a demolition?
Oh no, it was not demolition. It was a real fire. Whether it was, well, I think after the fact there were signs put up looking for information about the arsenal. But there was a lot of that. I mean, there was a while where, fires in the neighborhood were not uncommon at all.
For the rainbow that the weather made.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
No, it's, you get lucky every now and then.
Yeah.
The light's pretty and everything falls into place, and it's a bad situation, but there's just there's a lot going on. Those are the kinds of things that I enjoy, the challenge of trying to find and capture. Again, that whole block that the Ritz Theater is on, it was all businesses and organizations and things, barber shops and the social club that I photographed earlier. There were hotels on the other side of the street from it. It really had quite a storied history. But again, by the 95, 96, it was all slated for demolition. So businesses had moved out. People still hung around there, but there wasn't the activity there that there used to be. There had been at one time. One of the rooming houses, he was, that particular person, having some serious respiratory issues as a result of it. He was an AIDS patient and full-blown AIDS, respiratory issues, so they came in. The fire rescue were called to help him get into the hospital. It was kind of interesting because they put the masks on a lot, the fire rescue, and they'd also put them on the patients. Their big concern wasn't HIV and AIDS so much, but TB. TB was a big issue in the rooming houses. Mm-hmm. Confined spaces, hot. Yeah. So they put on a lot of protection because that was one of the big concerns. She was a friend of his, so she was a regular that I got to know in the neighborhood, so it was no big deal for me to be there. But she was very concerned about it. Talking to the crew before they took him off to the hospital. The inspectors, the fire inspectors would go around, and once the places were inspected and they figured things out, they would mark the buildings. And this particular one, his marking, I guess the building was considered too dangerous to enter. And this was Jennifer's Hall, which is still standing. But that symbol basically told the firefighters not to enter. And his quote says, "When this one goes up, it's going to be a big bonfire. We're not going in there. It's not worth getting killed for." And then again, with all of that going on, you've got, again, just normal stuff. You lived in the neighborhood. Huh? Oh, there were getting to be a lot of open lots at that point. He's off Madison Street. Yeah. He was born and raised in the area, but he currently lived in a rooming house in LaVilla. Again, trying to beat the demolition crew to the good stuff. And yeah, the JSO officers, they'd be cruising the area, patrolling the area. I think mostly it was just kind of curiosity, or if they'd hear problems with something. And, they'd go inspect, but they were concerned about people squatting in the houses and the fires and such, so they were trying to keep things under control as best as they could. But there wasn't a lot of intensity and a lot of energy put into it. Things get a little redundant after a while. You know, you see so many bulldozers and so many demolished houses.
That street, no sand, or there's what's on the road?
That's where they had already torn up all the pavers, everything that was. I believe that was Monroe Street. Yeah, it was on. That was the Magnolia Apartments on West Monroe. So that's just a block or so off of Jefferson. One of the things that was kind of interesting was so many institutions that were part of the neighborhood. Like this is the Masonic Lodge that's there, beautiful building. Generally, it's a private thing where outsiders were not welcome, but this was one of their rare public functions. So I was given permission to come in and photograph the events. But you know, this used to be one of those cornerstones in the neighborhood where everybody was from the neighborhood, worked there, and the churches that were in the neighborhood were that way. But by this point in time, like the original homeowners, most everybody that came to the events and showed up and participated, none of them lived in the neighborhood anymore. They'd come from someplace else, go to the functions there, and then they'd go back to their homes.
People who used to live there, families used to live there, still have that coming back to the churches.
Yes, yeah, there was definitely some of that. And you know, this place when the Masonic Lodge had events, it was packed. It was packed, but as soon as it was over, everything cleared out. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you know, the core, the people that would have been involved in this, yeah, most of them lived elsewhere. They still had some of the old habits and the old routines, but they weren't in the neighborhood anymore. This was at the back door. This was as people were leaving after the event. He was kind of the doorman greeter sort. Kids in the neighborhood. Yes?
When you were taking these photos of all these years, how aware were you of the history while you were out there? Did that affect the way you documented some of this stuff? It wasn't disappearing while you were there?
I've always been very interested in history. I mean, not as like learning dates and names and memorizing all that kind of stuff, but just how things relate to things in the past and how things in the future are formed by those connections. I've also been keenly aware of, in photography, I love vintage photography. But the things that I love about vintage photography aren't always the main subjects or the main events that are going on in the images. And I'm sure you can probably all relate to this. You know, you look at a picture from the 50s or from the 40s, and regardless of what's going on, you look at the hairstyles, you look at the clothes the people are wearing, you look at the cars parked along the streets. You know, all that peripheral stuff that's no big deal at that particular point in history, but you can't ever go back and recreate that. So I'm usually very conscious of those sorts of things whenever I'm photographing a project like this. I like things that are visual references to a particular point in time in history. Sometimes it's something like what I discovered at American Beach, which, you know, it makes perfect sense, but the advertising in the little bars and stuff would all be targeting the African American audience. But that was kind of foreign to me since that wasn't where I hung out. So those were things that I wanted to document. And again, your clothing, just things of that nature. Those were all things that in the back of my mind I'm aware of and I try to capture, knowing that they're not necessarily critical to the story I'm telling right now, but down the road, they'll become important elements as part of the document. This was kind of an interesting encounter. I was born in Kentucky. All my family's from Kentucky. So I saw this guy in the Kentucky hoodie, and I struck up a conversation with him. And somehow we started talking about football. His name was Sam Platt. Went to high school at Wilson High School. Played football for FSU in 1977 through 1981. And played for the Dallas Cowboys. And then he was in the Canadian Football League, Tampa Bay Bandits, and then he ended up in drug rehab. When I met him, he was living in a rooming house in LaVilla. Never could find him again. I wanted
Just that one day?
Just that one day. I crossed paths with him. He said he was living in a rooming house in LaVilla, but he was out of work after he had hurt his back doing construction work. So it's the stories and the people you encounter. I mean, everybody's got a story. You don't always know what it is, but it's. I've found more and more. There's celebrities out there. Everybody knows their story, but the everyday folks that are around you, if you give them a listen and just actually let them talk, they've all got amazing stories. There's always something in their lives that's noteworthy and spectacular and worthy of attention. Just so often it doesn't get out. They don't get to share. But this was an interesting one, and as a journalist, it's like, okay, this is really interesting. I went and told the sports guys; they got real interested about it, but then we never could track him down.
He didn't want to be found.
And he maybe didn't. And that's okay. The big old TV hauled out to the front porch.
Oh, wow.
I have known Kareem from, since I guess the early 80s, mid 80s. I got to know her not long after I came to town. And I just ran into her one day. This was a fish market on Beaver Street in LaVilla. It was one of the only white-owned businesses in the neighborhood. And I was in there taking pictures one day, and she came in to buy some seafood for dinner. So, this was the social club. There was a picture inside of the guys playing cards. Well, the building was about to get demolished, so he was helping remove the door from this to take to the guy's new location to reinstall it. Another one of the rooming house residents, his place was he was about to get moved out. I think we're getting into the Christmas season here. I'm trying to remember. Sorry about this. This was a long time ago, so I can't remember all the names and the dates anymore. Yeah, this was December of 95. 80-year-old Albert Nesbitt. Drinking a beer as he was watching his property being moved from his West Madison Street rooming house. The building had been sold by its owner to the city. Another family moving out. A little shotgun house. This is right behind the fire station that's still there in LaVilla. That's now an empty lot. These were the little, there's the 3 little shotgun houses that are still in LaVilla that are just sitting boarded up and decaying. These are them, but I think they had been moved to where they are now. I don't think they stayed at this original location.
Those are the 3 that are on West Beach.
Yes.
You go kind of around the curve.
Yes. But that's not where they were originally. They were on Lee Street initially, and they moved them to save them.
Just in poking around a little bit, that corner store that's just around the corner there, been there since 1947, and it started out as a family fruit market across the street.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting little spot. Then a corner store for.
Now, there's still a few little traces of the old neighborhood left there. There's a beautiful old house that's right next to Sally Industries, Federica Mendez's house, and that one's got quite a history. And the funny thing is, I wanted in that house to photograph her and it back when I was doing this, and she was having none of it. None of it. She would not let me in. She didn't want anything to do with it. I mean, I knew her, and she was perfectly social with me, but she was not going to have anything to do with it. It wasn't until about a year ago. One of the magazines we used to put out, Jack magazine at the paper, we were doing a story about it, and I finally got into her house and got to go do portraits of her there and photograph it, and it was as amazing as I was hoping it would be. It's just a spectacular house inside. Yeah. Old beat up neighborhoods are great backdrops for photo shoot. This is Paul Figuera, who is actually a good friend of mine, a commercial photographer in town. And he was doing a photo shoot of three sisters using the neighborhood. You know that guy, don't you, Logan? This was the oldest house in LaVilla. Pre-1985. It was on West Monroe Street. And it was slated for demolition. And it was one of the last ones kind of left standing while the historic committees and such all fought over it and tried to save it. This fellow had been a resident there for quite some time. He had lived there as a caretaker for the elderly couple that originally owned the house. After they passed away, the children allowed him to continue to live in the house. Let's see, the house. Yeah. About a week after I shot this photo, I got a call from him. A demolition crew came in, busted the front door down, confronted him for being in the house.
Oh, no.
They called the police. The police came and arrested him. And then after some conversations with the actual property owners of the family, they released him, but then he called me to tell me about it after the fact. So that's when I went back and visited with him after that. It's still pretty fresh.
How many of these pictures are staged or semi-staged? I mean, you don't say that go and stand by this door.
No.
I go in, I have conversations with the people. They show me around, they talk me through what happened, and I try and find moments within all of that help tell the story. So no, he was standing there just, outside the front door explaining what had happened to him just a little while before.
You take a bunch of pictures.
I take a lot of pictures.
Pick out.
And this was during the film days. I still took a lot of pictures. Now that it's digital, I take way too many pictures. Little street revival, a church from out of the neighborhood coming in.
Was LaVilla spared from the fire in 1945 or?
Yeah, it started on the edge. It actually started on the edge of LaVilla and burned east
The other one.
Yeah.
through
okay.
town. Yeah, it was a mattress factory on the edge of LaVilla that used like the Spanish moss and such to stuff the mattresses. And the spark caught that on fire, and away it went. And away went most of Jacksonville. This was one of the more spectacular little two stories that was in the neighborhood. There was Charles, who was quick to lay claim to one of the columns. This was the Pelican Bar on Davis Street. When I first came to Jacksonville, there were several bars on Davis Street. And when I came to town in 84, yeah, 84. And LaVilla was a hopping neighborhood still. It was a lot of people lived there, very busy. But for a young, scrawny white kid, it was a scary place. You know? And but I go everywhere with my job. I drive through every kind of neighborhood and all kinds of places. But on Friday nights, Saturday nights, Davis Street, Pelican Bar, couples around it, there'd be hundreds of people poured out into the streets. So it was quite the sight.
Did anybody say that mural?
No, I know, and to this day I kick myself for not trying to get a hold of one or two of them.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And the building had already been half torn down. I mean, the front of the building, the facade was gone already. And I drove by one day and it was open and I saw him in there and I knew him. So I quick stopped and jumped out and took some pictures, and he was scavenging the metal ductwork to sell for scrap. But yeah, the murals were wonderful. And yeah, I would love to have had one or two of those panels. Yeah, scavenging wire. Yeah, that was June of 1996. That's what the Ritz Theater used to look like when I knew the Ritz Theater initially. I think it had been boarded up since the late 70s. And again, it was like the corner building on an entire street or street block of businesses, apartments upstairs. There were a couple of hotels on this side of the street. So this was, you'd go in, this would be the front offices and such, and then that was the big theater that wrapped around the back, and then down the front of the street were all the other storefronts and apartments. And one of the building fires earlier, that was what had been on that lot there. And there had been something else on down to the corner there. And that was the one that burnt with the rainbow.
Where did you take that picture from?
I can't remember if I was in a helicopter or a small plane. I think, judging from the altitude, I must have been in a helicopter. I think I would have had to have been a lot higher in a plane. But I've flown in a little bit of everything over the years. But that was the condition of it.
That's the city of the stage.
Yeah. Stage, a little bit of the archway, the roof caving in. It was in bad shape.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much effort had gone into the salvage.
There was no salvage. The only thing that was salvaged from the original building is this facade, this one corner of the building's facade. Everything else that's there now is new construction. I have no idea. Again, I think the theater had been boarded up since the 70s, maybe a little later, but I don't think it had seen much activity in a very long time, even when I got to go in. And I just went in because one day I went by and the door was ajar. The old projector.
Wow.
This was another rooming house resident. She was the one that was concerned about the one fellow that was being taken in the ambulance. She was moving out of her rooming house. And that was Charles, and Charles was waiting for everybody to go out so he could start cleaning the place out. But that was just kind of the ebb and flow of life there.
Did you actually, like, tell the salvagers that they're, like, I'm getting kicked out?
They know. They see the activity. They see stuff moving out. They know.
You think there'd be a lot more people coming in to get all that stuff?
You know, I was around a couple times where there would be 4 or 5 people, but it wasn't like there was a huge swarm. There's not that much to get out of it. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't know what they were getting back then. I mean, yeah, I mean, copper wire. Copper gets pretty good money now, but yeah, but I'm trying to remember it's 90 cents a pound is what they were getting for copper back in '95. So I would guess the photo with Charles that had all the aluminum on the shopping cart. It was 45 cents a pound.
Wow. It's a lot of work for little money.
Yeah, that's why they weren't huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody was getting rich.
Yeah.
No.
This was a fellow that they just found passed out between a couple of the buildings there, and it wasn't far from the fire station, so just happened to be there when they found him. They got him up, got him to the hospital. He got a little bit of treatment. He was released before the day was over. He was fine. The other thing was there would be the other scavengers. I'm sure they wouldn't classify themselves that way, but the archaeologists and the historians that would come in, and they'd be in there with their metal detectors. And yeah, as soon as a house got moved out and the lot got cleared, they'd come in because what they wanted wasn't what was in the structure. What they wanted was the stuff that was underneath it. And so they'd come in and they'd find all kinds of stuff. And this was one person with some of his finds that he had accumulated over a period of time just from the LaVilla neighborhood that harkened back to the history. I mean, these were all Civil War era lead from bullets because there was a Civil War encampment in LaVilla. Old ink wells and old marbles, even some ceramic clay marbles. So there is, that gives you a reference point of where all this was in relation to what had been the train station, which is, and I don't even think that had been turned into the convention center yet. I'm not real sure. I'd have to double check the timeline. But this was a whole row of these 2 stories. This is boarded up and ready to be demolished. And this is, again, that's Monroe Street. This was them. There is the old Brewster Hospital. It was a rooming house at this point. It had been chopped up into little apartments. That little church is still in the neighborhood. And that's Federica Mendez's house right there. Sally Industries, I think. Sally's like right in this area. I think that's right. But all the rest of this is gone. That's where Brown's Cafe used to be, in there. Just taking a break. Passing through the neighborhood and smoke from a fire. And that's Monroe with its newly planted palm trees as they're getting ready to open up the West Monroe. final work on the eastbound street into downtown before it opened to traffic from I-10. And that's pretty much when I wrapped up the work there. That was May of '96, so that's pretty much when I kind of stopped spending the time out in the neighborhood. So that's what I have for pictures.
Beautiful.
So a little more expansive than what's just hanging on the wall. It's interesting. It's interesting to me because, as Shawana said earlier, when she invited me to be part of the show, I didn't feel like I had anything that was, in my mind, fit the theme of the show because I hadn't done any focus work on any particular neighborhood or any particular group in town. I mean, with my work at the paper, I'm everywhere. I'm doing something here, doing something there, but it's not a cohesive body of work. But then I thought about this work, which I really hadn't paid a lot of attention to in 20 plus years. So brought up to show it to her, and her reaction really surprised me. I mean, other than getting tearing up, she goes, "I had no idea," and that made me really stop and think, because I'm an old guy. I've been around, and this was just part of my routine. This is something that I did, and life goes on. And then I started thinking about it, and it's like, yeah, unless you're like 35 years or older, you have no idea what used to be here. There's no record of this. Nobody else was in there doing what I was doing. There's historic photos that show you what it used to look like back in the 40s and the 50s. You can go see those at the Ritz Theater and Museum. You can drive through now and see what it looks like, and you'll see a couple of old buildings that are still there. But I don't think anybody, because if you were a teenager, you were not in that neighborhood in that point in history. And so, and then when we had the opening, I heard that response again and again and again. How surprised people were that they had no idea that it was like this. So for me, it was really, really nice to be able to bring the work back out, look at it, have other fresh eyes see the work. And realize that, yeah, it's probably a pretty significant body of work. The other nice thing is it got attention. Patrick Fisher, who was with the Cultural Council, just left, which is a big loss for Jacksonville, but a great thing for him. He said, "Oh, you need to apply for one of these Community First Cultural Council micro grants. They give out 5 of them, and they give out 5 of them, $1,000 a piece. So you got to apply for one." I didn't think a whole lot about it. Then I saw, the deadline's coming up. So about 2 hours before the deadline, I pulled out my laptop and I filled out the application, answered their 4 questions, and sent it in.
You got one, didn't you?
I got one.
Yay!
And I didn't know that they had 115 people apply, and they gave out 5.
Wow, that was.
So I was flattered, a little surprised, but then when I went to the awards presentation, the other artists were there, and there was a common thread. A lot of people applied, and they wanted to buy new equipment for their art studio, or or fix this up, or do that, or buy this piece of gear. The 5 of us that were accepted, all of our proposals were doing something that gave back to an aspect of the community. And my proposal was, with that grant, it allows me to print a larger folio of images than the 13 that are here, that I can in turn donate to the Ritz Theater and Museum so it can be part of their permanent collection.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I'm a newspaper photographer. I'm not making a lot of money. I don't have the resources to do that out of pocket. But to be able to get that money to allow me to do that was important to me. It's a nice surprise. I'm thrilled to be able to do it. And hopefully, been talking with the director of the museum, and next year is the 20th anniversary of the Ritz Theater and Museum.
Oh,
And I've been involved with it since the Ritz was kind of like that. And Carol Alexander, who was the original director and curator at the Ritz, she's a good friend of mine. I've known her forever. Our kids used to be on the same soccer team together when they were in middle school, and so it's nice to be able to do something where I can give something back and give them something that they don't already have, and something that needs to be there, because this is something that this needs to be remembered too.
Now that you're aware of the gap in the knowledge and the impact it has on the community, knowing about that, would you consider something like a book project?
I consider anything. It just takes time and money, and I don't have an excess of either one. But I would certainly, if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, let's do this thing, and this is how we can make it happen," I'm all ears. I'm open to any ideas. No, I would love to leave something like that behind if there's a market. Photo books are tough. History books are tough. But I think this is a good interim. And honestly, I've got a couple other projects on that level that I would love to do before I die. And I've got to figure out how to make them happen too. And the clock's ticking. The older I get, the more time I realize I don't have left.
Are there any neighborhoods that are currently in jeopardy that you'd like to capture before they're not here? Like, for instance, the viaduct in the park areas that may go away if the development plan is to drop that bridge. Or
I don't know. The thing about a project like this, and the thing about American Beach Project, it really requires a lot of time, a lot of emotional commitment, a lot of energy, and I'm not sure how much of that I've got left. I still love going out and shooting for myself. I don't get to do enough of that anymore. I've got a lot of work that I have never done anything with, and I don't want to be one of those guys that all I'm doing is dipping into the past and pulling out old stuff. But there is a certain amount of that I want to do and need to do. It's unfinished business. And so, I'll keep shooting and I'll keep doing whatever comes up. And if the right project came along and it made sense and I could pull it off, I would do it. But, priorities shift a little bit, with age and life circumstances. I've been real lucky. I've gotten to do some wonderful things. And my job at the paper, although the newspaper industry is on its last gasp, I'm still doing what I want to do. And I'll keep doing it until they say we're not going to pay you to do it anymore. And then I'll figure something else out. I'm not looking to bail and go someplace else. I want to keep doing this. And partially because it keeps me out on the street. It keeps me meeting people. It keeps me in new situations. Every day is a different day. There's no 2 days have ever been the same in my 34 years at the paper. It's always new people, new circumstances. Things change just like that. And that's been a heck of a way to live your life and have a career. I can't think of too many other jobs that give you something. And so, what it's lacked in financial reimbursement, it's more than made up for in a richness of life experience. So I don't know. I never say never to anything, but it really just some things have come along in life that it just seemed like the thing to do, and I've done it. And I don't really think about the financial part of it or the time restrictions, but I've done it. American Beach was all on my own dime and on my own time. But by doing the work initially, I was able to get a grant from the Florida Humanities Council, which allowed me to take a leave of absence from the paper one summer to work on it full time and help finance printing and putting an exhibit together. So that was really cool, and I could see doing something like that in the future. But I would love to get a book done on that. That to me is a very important project that I think needs to be done. But I'm also working not only with my own work, but I work with the collection of photographer Lloyd Sandler. And Lloyd was a commercial photographer in Jacksonville. Started as a Navy photographer at Bayport during World War II. And stayed in town and worked as a commercial photographer, shooting whatever anybody paid money to do. And I met Lloyd fairly late in his life, and got to know him. First, it was like, oh, this guy's going to be a really cool story to put in the paper. And I used to go hang out in his one-bedroom, rent-subsidized apartment in Springfield, where he had hundreds of notebooks and boxes full of tens of thousands of 8x10 black and white prints of his whole career of work.
Wow.
And we became friends, and stayed friends for many years until he finally passed. And then I worked with his daughter to salvage his collection out of his apartment, which ended up being about 15,000 prints. And it's this time capsule of Jacksonville during one of the most dynamic times in the city's history. The 40s, the 50s, the 60s. And it's everything. It's skyline views, it's construction site photos, it's bathing beauties and bodybuilders on Jacksonville Beach in the 50s and 60s, strippers' portfolio photos. You like those because they pay cash. On the 4th floor.
His collection?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, I worked and get it all out of the place. I worked with his daughter and said, look, let me just we've got to keep it together. Because it could very easily have ended up in a dumpster. And Lloyd and I talked about that a lot. And he saw it as, kind of like his picture books. And I saw it in a little bigger historical perspective, and I felt like it was very important historically, and I thought commercially it had potential as well. And I kept it in climate-controlled storage for a couple of years and tried to work with it, but it was an overwhelming body of work. And I had young children at that point and full-time job, and I couldn't do it justice. And then when they were building this building, the guys that were in the Florida collection, they knew Lloyd because he used to walk the circuit every day from his apartment. He'd go downtown, he'd go to the Landing, he'd go to the hot dog vendor at the Independent Life Building, he'd come by the Florida collection at the old Hayden Burns Library, and he would show them this latest volume full of photos, and that's how I met him on the street. And but they approached his daughter from the Florida collection and said, what happened to all of Lloyd's photos? Because we've got money for acquisitions and we would like to.
So it's a permanent collection? Oh, wow.
I ended up hiring an intellectual property rights attorney to represent the family and negotiated the sale of the physical collection to the city of Jacksonville for the downtown library. And we put a lot of restrictions on it. Couldn't leave Jacksonville. It can't be broken up. You can't sell off pieces of it. And the family retained copyright and marketing rights to the images. And I've been acting as the family's representative for that collection for over a decade. So, and that's I would love to do Lloyd Sanders Jacksonville. I would love to do that. So, again, I just don't know how to pull it off. So, yes? No. These actually are not my photographs. I mean, I took the photographs, but I took these as employees of the Florida Times Union. So ultimately, they own the rights to these images, and everything I've been doing with them, with this show and elsewhere, has been with their permission, and they're cool with it. So the library's been able to use the images for their promotions and that sort of thing, which is great. These prints that are in this show will be part of the folio that I put together that will be donated to the Ritz, and the paper's thrilled with that. It doesn't cost them anything, and I managed to pull that off, and so yeah. But no, this is my work, but it's not my work to do with as I see fit. Now, other work that I work with, like my American Beach work, is all mine.
Have you had the opportunity, or has there been interest expressed for you to share this with city government? The mayor or the council, because the city has some other properties, like the Armory Building and Florida Theater and all of those. I mean, for them to look and see what happened to the Ritz, maybe is a wake up to say you've got some other places you ought to be.
People were involved during all of this. I mean, people that are still around now knew
worked on this
Well,
in
did
the
they learn
70s
something,
and the 80s.
you know?
I don't know.
Well,
You look at I don't know if they learned anything, but
a
I know
couple of-
people that are.
A couple
were
of
involved
things
in
there.
it.
There are people that are very active in fighting it and, raising those issues. That's not my role.
But a lot of people were very pro taking it down.
Sure.
Yeah, because I remember all that.
And, and my initial impression was, oh, this is a cool neighborhood. These are wonderful buildings. They should all be safe. But then I start walking through them, and after a while, the realization comes that, the time to be talking about that was 20 years prior.
Yeah.
Is that absentee owners? It's not nobody taking care of their property?
Yeah. I mean,
Slumlords?
yeah, you could say that,
Well,
but I'm not going to be,
segregation.
yeah, to a certain extent.
I mean, they're at the end phase.
Yeah, this was already the end days.
Yeah.
This was, the writing was on the wall, and there's not a lot of motivation to put more money into your property at that point.
It's fires.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm sure.
But my role is not as an activist or an advocate. I mean, I'm a journalist. I'm there to document. I'm there to document. I have an opinion, but I don't. My role is not to advocate for any particular perspective one way or the other. And that's hard sometimes, but I've been doing it for my whole career, so it's not that bad.
It was great.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. I know
Thank you for doing this.
hopefully the nasty weather passed on by, and
Probably always quick.
so I want to thank you so much for getting my butt in gear to pull this stuff out and have it open doors for me that I hadn't anticipated. It's been a really nice surprise.
Well, our thanks again to Bob Self. This was truly a pleasure. As I'm sure you all have seen, just, Bob is so humbled by the work that he does. But when you see it on this kind of grand level and thinking of all of the things that he's done over the years, he's one of our grand artists that really is helping to showcase what Jacksonville looks like to a whole community of people who don't always get to come to those places. So you can come back many times to enjoy Bob's work here on the first and third floor if you haven't got a chance to go up there. We're going to close the program a little bit early so that you can take a look on all 4 floors of the current exhibit. And please keep giving us feedback. We just heard that we're voted for Best Art Gallery for the Folio Weekly.
Wow.
And speaking of Folio Weekly, even though technically I guess they're competition for my employer, the Times Union, the new issue came out today, and I'm the cover boy, which I'm not real comfortable with. But the story that they did was very, very nice, and it started talking just with the writer here as we looked at this work and talked about process and kind of how I do what I do. So if you see a copy this week, pick it up. I didn't embarrass myself. So I'm grateful for
When you
that.
walk outside the front door over here, there's all the periodicals.
Oh,
You can
yeah,
pick up a
okay.
copy. I didn't want to embarrass Bob. I was going to bring a stack of them
I
in
did.
here.
I stole a stack out of that box earlier today.
So just thank you guys. There'll be more programs coming up, a few this week. I think I put on all you all's seats the October programming guide. So this exhibit also anniversaries with Consolidation and the 50th anniversary we talked about. So we'll be having a really big program on October 3rd, which is Art Walk Night, to commemorate what Consolidation is and to kind of say happy 50 years to Jacksonville. But where are we going in this next 50 years? And so we have to all be a part of those kind of conversations so that hopefully things like this, again, don't necessarily happen without us all feeling like we were a part of that conversation before it gets to that. So continue to enjoy the public library. There are phenomenal programs. You might can sneak in with conversations with Courtney if you want some wine and cheese, because I didn't have any of that for you here. But they got that up at the front. So, we'll sneak in there if you like. But again, take your time. We're open until 7. And if there's anything that we could be doing more and leveraging and talking about arts and culture in our community, please definitely seek me out. It's easy to find me. Send me an email. And if you love this, take the time to go on jackspubliclibrary.org and go to Counting Opinions, because I promise you, they read those things and they count your opinions. So if we're
I
doing
did
a
my
really great
survey
job.
yesterday.
Oh, then
I
excellent,
did not
because,
do it.
well, I love hearing this, and the library does too. Do those
Did
surveys.
the long one.
The long one. Oh, yeah, the one about
one.
how we as stakeholders. This is your tax dollars at work. So I like to
Yeah.
tell people all the time, if you're not giving us that information, then you're doing us a disservice, because we can't really feed you all as a community if we're not getting feedback, right? So, thanks, guys.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Um,